Thank you everybody for being here. I see we are almost 20 people. We are now 20 people exactly. And you're all welcome to this colloquium again via online. This time we are very, very happy to welcome Dr. Moira Zuazo. She's an expert on democracy and sustainability in the Andean region. And in her most known publications, she discussed the reconfiguration of the Bolivian state and the ruralisation of Bolivian politics. Currently, she is an associate researcher at the Free University of Berlin and a visiting lecturer at different universities. This time, with this colloquium, we move to South America, to Lima and La Paz, and Dr. Zuazo is going to present us adaptation to climate change and sustainability in these both cities, not the cases of Lima and La Paz. So with those words, please, Moira, the screen is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Denise, and thank you for and all of you to be here. I am very glad, very happy to be here. This photo that we have on the screen, it's a photo of the phenomenon El Niño 2015-2016. This research, I did it at Trandes. That's a program at the Free University of Berlin and the Catholic University of Peru to study the Andean region. As Denise said, I'm going to present the postdoctoral research that I did 2017 and 18 at Trandes, the cases of Lima and La Paz. Lima is the capital of Peru, and La Paz is the seat of government from Bolivia. Again, I have this Google or this map of the world where we can see as well this huge El Niño 2015 and 2016. And that's the point. That's what I wanted to study. At the end of 2015 and the beginning of 2016, the NOAA, the American Institution to Study the Phenomenon El Niño, said we are going to have a huge El Niño. We have a huge El Niño at this period. End of 2015 and the beginning of 2016. And El Niño means for Peru and for Lima, huge rain. And later I'm going to explain why it's very important. And for La Paz, El Niño means drought, very complicated drought. But the question was that this El Niño phenomenon that we expected didn't happen. It was like normal the whole year, 2016, and everyone was like thinking, okay, it was not so hard, so big, or some rains, but very small, and no drought in La Paz. But a year later, at the end of 2016 and the beginning of 2017, floods, a huge rain occurred in Lima and a very extremely drought in La Paz. We have 3 months without rain. That's not normal at all. So the study compares both climate change related disaster events, the one from Lima and the one from La Paz. And the question that I wanted to look after was, what is the link between social process and transformative change? There's a relationship between the social process in the society and transformative change. I'm going to present these different points. first the theoretical framework, then the results of their research. The first result is transformative adaptation begins with a change of perspective. The second result is systemic nature of the disaster, and that is related especially to cities on the south. The third find was democracy. What's the relationship between democracy and transformative adaptation? Then the other find was the relationship between disaster and inequalities. And the last one is related to the relationship between democracy, civil society, adaptation, and sustainability. The theoretical framework. I use it basically two different approaches. The first one, when we study adaptation to climate change, the literature told us or tell us that we need to think about transformative change, and that is not only reform. Reform is not enough to really go through a path from adaptation to climate change. So we need a transformative change, and that means that we need another approach that begins with thinking that this change is iterative. That means that we have to look and be open and going through the change. And the second point for this theoretical framework is related to the cities on the south. And there we are going to see a very close relationship between socially constructed risk or social construction of disaster risk and this trigger that is related to climate change. I mean, there is most no disaster that is only caused from climate change. So disasters are explained by their entanglements. And that's very important because we can understand through these entanglements what happened and what was the process and how important was the social and political process to think about adaptation to climate change. The cases to compare are, like I said, Lima. The disaster took the name El Niño Costero, the coastal El Niño, and that was January to February 2017. And in the case of La Paz, the disaster took the name the water crisis because it was a big drought through 3 months. The first finding was that transformative adaptation begins with a change of perspective. If this change of perspective doesn't happen, I saw that the society is not open to this new approach. In the case of Lima, I saw that uncertainty was dashed because for every government, it's very important to give clear explanations, to give security. And the government said the cause of the unusual rains is El Niño Costero, the coastal El Niño. But the problem is that El Niño Costero has no relationship with the El Niño phenomenon. And the government knows, of course, and they have an institution, the name of the institution is ENFEN. That's an institution for the study of El Niño phenomenon. And they are really developing science around this phenomenon that it's only related to Peru, and they are talking really El Niño, it's a name of Peru because it was developed in the hundred of years before from the fishermen's there in the coast of Peru. So we have the right to use the name, and it's right. But the problem is that the science, natural science, developed through this global American institution that is studying phenomenon El Niño at the global level, and they give the whole world data, and it's more or less explain what's going on with El Niño. There was no relationship between El Niño Costero, this coastal El Niño, and El Niño phenomenon. So that the end of this entanglement was that Peru and Lima did like a poor adaptation. It was not a process to adaptation to climate change because the government was said it was El Niño Costero, but there was no talk, there was no debate around this question. There is a relationship between El Niño Costero and El Niño, and in the whole media, newspapers, television, radio, everywhere, the journalists were talking about El Niño Costero, the coastal El Niño, and there were no questions about this relationship between El Niño is not the same as El Niño Costero. We are facing really a big challenge related to climate change. It was like closed. In the opposite side, in the La Paz water crisis, I saw that the water crisis of La Paz constitute a breaking point for the society. The society and the media, when we were looking at television and news, newspapers everywhere, there was no an explanation to understand what was going on. It's normal for La Paz that we have this rainy season between November, December, January, February, and there was no drop of water on this time. 3 months that should be raining, and there was no water. In the photo, I have an image from the place where the water should be there, and we see this different. I'm going to show it. Okay, the difference of colors. The water should be this here, and was very, very smaller, and that was at the beginning of the water crisis. And I saw as well that this breaking point impacted the government, especially at the municipal level. I saw in some interviews the emergence of a new perspective on municipal officials. When I saw the society, the whole society, it was interesting to see in La Paz we have a festival in February, and of course 2017 no one was going to play with water, and it's a water festival. But 2018, a year later, it was the same. It's more like Paseños, the people from La Paz, they learned to have other kind of relationship with water. The finding is that there is a causal chain between reality as the unknown. When we think that we don't understand what we are facing, what's a challenge, we can see that there is a place of like an uncertain place, and there is the place to emerge for the emergence of a new perspective that is open to transformative change. For example, when we think about today, the current day, and the Corona crisis, it's interesting to see the newspapers, to see that new questions are emerging, exactly because we don't really understand the different relationships, what is going on. And the government cannot give the explanations, so it's important to go to the science, and we see in the media all the time the scientists, doctors, the specialists in virology. No? Okay. The other finding was this systemic nature of the disaster. And that was very important for me to see that it's a very important approach when we study cities on the south. When we see Lima, Lima is the biggest city in the world that is built in the desert. And it's interesting because the city is built in the desert, they have no storm sewage system. But that's not the whole story. We have as well the problem that the city is growing, and everyone knows, and the official knows, and the people in the society as well, that slopes are places with a lot of risk, but because everyone of these houses were awash, there we can see most of the people that died. In La Paz, we have a city that is constructed in a semi-arid territory, and in La Paz, we knew side the 90s really, that at the year 2009, we were going to face the cross between storage capacity of reservoirs and population growth. We knew that. But the question is why we didn't do something. And new reservoirs should be constructed and so on. We have this disaster trigger, 3 months of delay in the onset of rains, and that's related to climate change. But we see as well the weakness of the institutions. We knew that we needed a new reservoir for the city, and nothing happened. The finding, both in Lima and La Paz, we see the systemic nature of the disaster. In the photo, we see the river Rimac, how it was flooded, and all the houses there that have this big problem. What is the role of democracy in relationship to this approach, transformative adaptation? It was very interesting for me to see that in Lima, because of this narrative, we are facing El Niño Costero. El Niño phenomenon, it's something that we know in the school, for example. Every child in Lima learn about El Niño phenomenon, El Niño, because it's a huge rain, and it causes disasters. But El Niño comes in the past. El Niño came every 25, 10, 15 years. El Niño in the climate change time, so nowadays, it's coming not every 10, 15 years, and we cannot really predict what is the relationship between El Niño and climate change. And the main point for this research was that El Niño Costero has no relationship at all with El Niño. It's something that it's been studied, and it's not a topic of this research because this research is from the social science perspective, but it's not, until today, it's not explained. And in Lima, we had no open debate space, and there was no politicization of the issue. And when they were talking about the topic, the issue was not adaptation to climate change or new challenges, but to reconstruct what we had in the past, the reconstruction. That was the main point. In La Paz, I saw a space of open debate, the politicization of the topic, and we came to a governance crisis. So the finding is that democracy as a space of open debate, it's very important in two different moments, and it has a different role in two different moments. At the beginning, for this change of perspective and this emergence of new questions. And after the crisis, it's as well important because you can only have institutional change. I mean, this new approach that is in the society, as well in the municipal government or in the national government, in order to go through this democratic process and make this institutional change, you should have a democracy that is functioning, this debate that is working. We see in this photo what happened with these floods in Lima, and of course this relationship between the vulnerability of some families that are much bigger than for others. I saw in Lima this emergence or a strengthening of inequalities, or both. In La Paz, at the beginning, there was a moment of solidarity in a very concentrated time of the disaster, and that was very important because there's a relationship between the solidarity and the possibility to governance. But in the second moment, I saw in La Paz that the inequalities are as well growing because the resources that different families have to allocate to adaptation measures are totally different. And of course, everyone is looking at the challenge, and the separation in the society grows. I saw this causal chain between inequalities, social cohesion, and city governance. This photo is very interesting. It's not very easy to see. We have a photo from Alacitas Festival in La Paz. There's a festival where paseños, they go to some streets, and there are many people that are selling different things. We are saying one of these women that are selling houses, and what she's showing, it's a tank on the roof. In this Alacitas Festival, you can buy what you need. You can buy hopes because you want to have a house with a tank on the roof. So you buy to this woman a house with a tank on the roof. That means for me that for everyone was clear that we are facing a big challenge, and we have to prepare us in order to cope with. In Lima, I saw a weak social entanglements, and for me it was clear through the interviews that was a legacy of armed confrontation that Peru faced in the 80s. And after that, the government of Fujimori as well, that was an authoritarian one. And what we see until today is that you have an environmental movement, but very dispersed, and they don't get to connect with other protests from other, for example, this environmental movement is strong in the city, in Lima, but they don't connect at all with the protests, for example, from the mines in the countryside. In the case of La Paz, I saw 3 decades of social empowerment and open debate, like the 80s, 90s, and 2000. And there is, until today, I mean, an imaginary of a strong civil society. And I saw that different protests, they connect between them very, very fast. Oh, thank you. The bibliography that I cited in the paper, and the images as well. Thank you very much.